The day the human arrived, the Empire did not celebrate. It watched. From the highest towers of living crystal to the lowest streets that pulsed with alien light, millions of eyes turned toward a single figure walking through the gates of the capital. No armor. No escort worth noting. No visible sign of power. Just a human. And that alone was enough to stir quiet contempt. They had expected something else. A warlord, perhaps. A towering brute bred for violence. Or at the very least, a desperate diplomat eager to bow, to beg, to prove humanity deserved a place among superior species. That was the narrative the Empire had accepted for decades. Humans were resilient, yes. Clever, occasionally. But small. Fragile. Limited. Replaceable. Yet the man walking through their gates carried none of that desperation. Elias Varn did not rush. He did not hesitate. His steps were measured, calm, as if the weight of an entire civilization's judgment pressing down on him meant nothing at all. His gaze moved, not with awe, not with fear, but with quiet observation, taking in every structure, every movement, every detail as though he were studying a battlefield rather than entering a foreign-thrown world. That unsettled them more than anything else. The whispers followed him immediately. Too calm. Too steady. Too wrong. By the time he reached the palace, the air itself felt tense, as though something unseen had already begun shifting beneath the surface of the Empire. The great doors opened without announcement. Inside, the throne hall stretched endlessly, carved from materials no human world possessed, glowing faintly with a cold, regal light. Warriors, nobles, advisors, beings who had commanded fleets and crushed rebellions, lined the chamber in silent judgment. At the far end stood the queen. Tall. Imposing. Untouchable. Queen Sereth did not descend from her throne. She did not soften her expression. Her eyes, sharp and distant, studied the human the way one might study an unfamiliar weapon, curious, cautious, unimpressed. "So," she said, her voice echoing through the hall, calm but edged with authority, "this is what your world has sent. Not a greeting. Not respect. An assessment." Elias stopped at the center of the chamber. He did not kneel immediately. He did not speak. For a brief moment, silence stretched, long enough for tension to sharpen, for eyes to narrow, for hands to twitch near weapons that would never be drawn in the throne hall. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. Not submission. Not defiance. Something balanced between the two. "I am what was required," he said. Nothing more. The response was simple, but it struck the room harder than it should have. Several members of the court shifted, their expressions tightening. It was not the words, it was the tone. There was no attempt to impress. No attempt to justify his presence. No attempt to please them. The queen noticed. Her gaze sharpened slightly, just enough to betray the smallest flicker of interest before it vanished behind practiced control. "You stand here," she continued, "as part of a union meant to prevent further conflict between our civilizations. A bond of peace, forged not by trust, but necessity." Her eyes did not leave him. "You understand what that means." "I do." "And you accept your place within it?" Another pause. Not hesitation. Consideration. Elias lifted his eyes to meet hers fully for the first time, and in that moment, something shifted, subtle but undeniable. Not in the room. In her. "I accept the purpose," he said calmly. "But I do not accept a place beneath it." The chamber froze. It was not an insult. Not openly. But it carried an edge the court had not expected from someone in his position. A human. Alone. Surrounded by power far beyond his own. Several nobles reacted immediately, their expressions hardening, some stepping forward as if ready to challenge him, to remind him exactly where he stood. The queen did not move. For a long moment, she simply watched him. Then, slowly, she rose. The motion alone silenced the chamber. "You speak carefully," she said, descending the steps of her throne with deliberate grace. "For someone with no power here." Elias did not step back. Power. The word lingered between them. "I speak truth," he replied. "Power is simply how loudly that truth is enforced." A dangerous answer. Too dangerous. Yet he delivered it without arrogance, without challenge. Just calm certainty. And that was what made it unsettling. The Queen stopped a few steps away from him, close enough now that the difference between them was unmistakable, her presence overwhelming, refined, absolute. And yet, he did not shrink. Not even slightly. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in something far more complicated. Curiosity. "You are either very brave," she said quietly, "or very foolish." Elias held her gaze. "Those are often the same thing," he said. For the first time, something almost imperceptible shifted in her expression. Not amusement, not approval, but recognition. The ceremony that followed was cold, precise, efficient. Words were spoken in both languages, their meanings binding two species that did not trust one another. A thread of silver energy linked their hands for a moment, symbolizing unity. The court observed, judged, waited for weakness that never came. Elias did not falter. He did not overperform either. He simply stood, present, unshaken. When it ended, the applause was minimal. Respect had not been earned. Not yet. Later, as the crowds dispersed and the weight of the event settled into silence, the Queen walked beside him through the palace gardens. Bioluminescent structures cast soft light across the path, illuminating the contrast between them, alien perfection and human simplicity. For a time, neither spoke. Then, without looking at him, she said, "You were not what they expected." "I gathered that. They expected weakness." Elias's expression did not change. "Most do." That answer drew her attention. She turned slightly, studying him again, more closely this time. "And what should they expect?" she asked. A simple question. But something in the way she asked it suggested she was no longer speaking as a ruler addressing a political asset. She was asking because she wanted to know. Elias stopped walking. The light shifted across his face, revealing nothing more than the same calm composure he had carried since entering the Empire. "That depends," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "on how long they choose to misunderstand us." The words settled between them, heavier than they should have been. For a brief moment, the Queen said nothing. Then she turned away, continuing down the path as if the conversation had ended. But it hadn't. Because for the first time since the human had arrived, she wasn't certain what she was dealing with. And somewhere, deep beneath the surface of a perfectly controlled empire, something had begun to change. No one had seen it yet. But it was already there. Waiting. The palace did not grow quieter after the union. It grew sharper. Every corridor Elias walked felt measured. Every glance held weight. The guards did not relax in his presence. They studied him. The servants did not speak freely. They observed. Even the silence itself felt deliberate, as though the entire structure of the empire was watching, waiting for him to make a mistake. He never did. Days passed, and the human adapted without effort anyone could see. He learned their customs quickly, but never overperformed them. He spoke only when necessary, but when he did, his words were clear, precise, and carried a weight that unsettled those who expected uncertainty. He did not seek influence, yet influence began to gather around him anyway. That was the first problem. The second came when the council began to notice. The Queen's advisors were not fools. They had ruled systems, commanded fleets, crushed rebellions before they could take shape. They understood patterns. And the pattern forming around the human was wrong. Too controlled. Too consistent. One meeting was enough to confirm their suspicions. The chamber was filled with rising voices when Elias first sat among them. A dispute over outer territories had spiraled beyond logic. Accusations, pride, old rivalries surfacing in ways that had nothing to do with the actual issue. It was not uncommon. Power rarely moved quietly. Elias said nothing at first. He listened. That, in itself, went unnoticed. But the Queen noticed. From her elevated seat, Sereth watched the human as he observed her counsel, his expression unchanged, his posture relaxed, as if the chaos unfolding around him did not concern him at all. It should have. He was part of this empire now, bound to it, tied to every decision made within that chamber. Yet he did not react. He studied. And then, when the noise finally fractured into a moment of strained silence, he spoke. "You're solving the wrong problem. The room froze. Every eye turned to him, some in irritation, some in disbelief. One of the senior advisors leaned forward, his tone sharp. And what exactly would a human know about problems at this level? Elias met his gaze without resistance. Enough to recognize when pride is being mistaken for strategy. The insult was subtle, precise, effective. Several members of the council stiffened, ready to respond, but Elias continued before they could. "You're arguing over territory that won't matter in 3 cycles," he said calmly. "The trade routes feeding those systems are already unstable. If they collapse, control of the territory becomes irrelevant." Silence. Not because they agreed. Because they were thinking. The Queen leaned forward slightly, her attention narrowing. "Explain," she said. Elias did. Not in long speeches. Not in complex demonstrations. Simple. Direct. Logical. He pointed out weaknesses in their assumptions, inefficiencies in their current deployments, and the inevitable consequences of decisions driven more by ego than foresight. He did not challenge their authority. He didn't need to. He dismantled their argument instead. When he finished, the chamber remained quiet. Not out of respect. Out of recalibration. One of the older generals spoke first, slower than before. "If what he says is correct." "It is," Elias said. Again, not arrogant. Certain. The general studied him, then turned his attention back to the council display. Others followed. Within moments, the entire direction of the discussion shifted. Not because the human had demanded it. Because he had made it impossible not to. The Queen watched all of it. Carefully. When the meeting ended, the council did not speak to Elias as they exited. Some avoided him entirely. Others glanced at him with expressions they could not quite hide: uncertainty, irritation, something close to unease. One thing was clear. He had changed something. Without trying. That night, Sereth found him in one of the outer corridors, standing alone, looking out over the city. The lights of the capital stretched endlessly below, pulsing with life, power, control. "You disrupted my council," she said. Elias didn't turn. "They were already disrupted. That is not your place to decide." "No," he agreed. "It's yours." That answer caught her off guard. She stepped closer, her presence filling the space beside him. "And yet you acted." "I spoke." A distinction without difference. Elias finally turned to face her. "There's always a difference," he said. "Power forces outcomes. Truth redirects them." She held his gaze. For a moment, neither spoke. "You assume your perspective is truth," she said. "I assume outcomes matter more than perspective." Again, simple. Again, precise. And again, it unsettled her. Before she could respond, something shifted. Not in the conversation. In the air. Elias felt it first. A subtle change, pressure, movement, something just out of alignment. His posture adjusted instantly, almost imperceptibly, but enough for the Queen to notice. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Because in the next second, the corridor changed. A flicker above. A distortion. Then movement. Fast. A figure dropped from the upper structure, blade already descending, aimed directly at Elias's position. There was no warning, no hesitation. The strike was clean, precise, designed to kill before reaction was possible. For anyone else, it would have worked. Elias moved. Not dramatically. Not visibly fast. Just enough. The blade passed where his throat had been less than a moment before, slicing through empty air. The assassin landed smoothly, already shifting for a second strike. Elias didn't step back. He stepped in. His hand caught the attacker's wrist mid-motion. Not forcefully. Not violently. Just controlled. Exact. The momentum of the strike collapsed instantly, redirected before it could complete. The assassin reacted, twisting, attempting to recover. Too slow. Elias rotated his grip, using the attacker's own movement against him. The weapon slipped free. The assassin's balance broke. In less than a second, he was on the ground, pinned, unable to move. No struggle. No drawn-out fight. Over. The Queen hadn't moved. Not because she couldn't. Because she hadn't needed to. And that was the problem. Guards flooded the corridor seconds later, weapons raised, energy fields locking onto the restrained attacker. They hesitated when they saw the situation, when they saw the human standing over a trained Imperial assassin, completely unharmed. One of them stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty." "Secure him," she said, her voice calm but sharper than before. They obeyed immediately. The assassin was taken. The corridor cleared. Silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. Sereth turned to Elias slowly. "You should be dead," she said. Not anger. Not accusation. Observation. "Probably," he replied. Her eyes narrowed. "That was not luck." "No." "Then what was it?" Elias looked at her, his expression unchanged. "Preparation." The answer was insufficient. They both knew it. "You reacted before the attack was visible," she said, stepping closer. "Before any signal could have reached you. My own guards didn't move that quickly." Elias didn't respond immediately. For the first time since she had met him, there was a pause that meant something. Not hesitation. Decision. "Then?" "Because I've seen it before," he said. That wasn't an explanation. It was a deflection. She recognized it instantly. "You are not what you appear to be," she said quietly. Elias met her gaze. "And what do I appear to be?" "A symbol," she said. "A political solution. A controlled variable." "And what do you think I am now?" Another pause. Longer this time. Her answer came slower. "I think," she said, "you are a question my empire cannot yet answer." Elias didn't smile. But something in his eyes shifted. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Something deeper. "Then you should be careful how you define the question," he said. Because somewhere beyond the palace walls, something else had already begun to move. The assassin had not been alone. And whatever had sent him was not finished. The attack was not announced. It revealed itself. At first, it was only a pattern. Trade routes that went silent without distress signals. Outposts that reported nothing, and then stopped reporting entirely. Patrol fleets that returned with gaps in their formations. Commanders unable to explain losses that should not have been possible. The Empire had seen war before. This was different. There was no declaration. No visible enemy gathering at the borders. No grand show of force meant to intimidate or provoke. Only absence. Only pressure. And slowly, inevitably, instability. The Council reacted as it always did. With noise. Strategies were proposed, discarded, argued over, resurrected, and torn apart again. Fleets were redirected, then redirected again. Resources shifted in ways that satisfied immediate concerns but created deeper vulnerabilities. They were fighting something they could not see. And it showed. Elias remained where he always was. At the edge. Watching. He did not interrupt. He did not challenge. Not at first. Because this part was necessary. They needed to feel the failure. Only then would they listen. Queen Sereth stood at the center of it all, her control absolute on the surface, her voice steady as she directed movement across half the empire. But Elias could see the cracks forming, not in her, but in everything around her. Pride was turning into pressure. Pressure into mistakes. And mistakes into openings. One meeting stretched longer than the rest. Reports had just arrived from 3 outer systems. All lost within the same cycle. No survivors. No clear enemy presence. Just destruction precise enough to suggest intent, but subtle enough to deny pattern. One of the generals slammed his hand against the command display. "This is not war. This is sabotage. We are being bled deliberately." Another responded immediately, "Then we strike back. Full mobilization. Sweep every outer system and force them into open conflict. And chase shadows while they dismantle us elsewhere." A third snapped. The argument escalated. Predictably. Elias waited. Then, as the room reached its breaking point, he stepped forward. You're already losing. Silence hit harder than any command. Every eye turned. The same general who had spoken before glared at him. Then perhaps you would like to explain how we win. Elias walked to the central display. He didn't rush. Didn't hesitate. He simply moved as if he already knew where everything mattered. You're reacting to events, he said. That means you're already behind. One of the advisors scoffed. We are responding to attacks on our empire. No, Elias replied calmly. You're responding to what they want you to see. He adjusted the display, isolating specific regions. These systems weren't chosen at random, he continued. They're part of a supply network you haven't mapped correctly. That is incorrect, another advisor said immediately. Our logistics are outdated, Elias cut in. By at least 2 cycles. The room stiffened. That was not a suggestion. That was a flaw. He highlighted a series of points across the map. Your enemy isn't trying to destroy you directly. Not yet. They're isolating your outer systems, disrupting your internal movement, and forcing your fleets to stretch thin. One of the older commanders leaned forward slowly, studying the pattern. If that's true. It is, Elias said again. Always that same certainty. Never louder. Never forced. And if it is, Elias continued, then the systems you're defending don't matter. The ones you're ignoring do. He shifted the map again. A cluster of regions appeared, quiet, untouched, strategically unremarkable at first glance. Until he began connecting them. Trade, fuel, reinforcement routes. Hidden dependencies the Empire had stopped paying attention to because they had never been challenged before. If these fall, Elias said, you won't just lose territory. You'll lose the ability to hold anything at all. The silence deepened. This time, it wasn't resistance. It was realization. Queen Sereth stepped forward slowly. You're suggesting we abandon current defenses, she said. I'm suggesting you stop defending what doesn't matter, Elias replied. And instead, force them to come to you. A dangerous strategy. High risk. High control. The council hesitated. Because this wasn't just a tactical shift. It was a change in mindset. From reaction to control. Sereth studied the map. Then him. Explain, she said. Elias did. He outlined a plan that did not rely on overwhelming force, but on precision. Cutting supply chains. Redirecting fleets not to chase, but to corner. Creating pressure where the enemy needed freedom to operate. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't aggressive. It was inevitable. By the time he finished, no one spoke. Not because they doubted him. Because they couldn't find a flaw fast enough. One of the generals finally exhaled slowly. If we commit to this, we expose the core systems temporarily. Yes. And if you're wrong, Elias looked at him. Then you lose faster. Brutal. Honest. Unavoidable. The Queen made the decision. We proceed, she said. No hesitation. No compromise. The council reacted immediately, some in agreement, others in quiet resistance, but the command had been given. And for the first time since the attacks began, the Empire stopped reacting and started moving. The results came faster than expected. Supply lines that had gone silent began stabilizing. Enemy movements, once unpredictable, started showing pattern under pressure. Fleets that had operated freely were forced into narrower corridors, their options reduced. They were being pushed, controlled, exactly as Elias had predicted. Respect followed. Not openly, not all at once, but it came. The same advisors who had dismissed him now paused before speaking against him. Generals who had ignored him now asked for his input. The shift was subtle, but undeniable, and the Queen saw all of it. More importantly, she felt it. One evening, after another successful redirection of enemy movement, she found Elias where he often stood, overlooking the city, silent, distant, as if the war unfolding across her empire was just another variable being managed. You changed the outcome, she said. Elias didn't turn. You made the decision. Because you gave me the right one. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You still could have chosen differently." She stepped beside him. "I didn't." "No," he agreed. "You didn't." Silence settled again. But it was different now. Less guarded. Less distant. "You've seen this before," she said quietly. "Not this war. But something like it." Elias's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Yes." "How many?" Another pause. "Enough." She studied him. Not as a ruler evaluating an asset. As someone trying to understand something that didn't fit within her world. "You speak like someone who has commanded far more than soldiers," she said. Elias finally looked at her. "I speak like someone who remembers what happens when you don't." That answer stayed with her, long after the conversation ended. But the war did not slow. Because pressure always creates response. And their enemy had been watching too. Waiting. Learning. Then it happened. Not at the edges of the Empire. Not in the outer systems. At the center. The alert came without warning. A breach. Deep within core space. Impossible. Every defense grid had been active. Every fleet positioned according to Elias's strategy. There was no gap. No weakness that should have allowed entry. And yet, something had come through. The display lit up across the command chamber, projections shifting violently as data flooded in faster than it could be processed. A single object. No fleet. No escort. Just one. But its energy signature was wrong. Completely. "Identify it," Sereth ordered. No classification match. One of the operators responded immediately. "It's not using known propulsion. It's not following known physics." "Trajectory." "Direct," another said, voice tightening. "Straight for the capital." The room went still, because they all understood what that meant. Not distraction. Not sabotage. This was a strike. Elias stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on the projection. For the first time since the war began, something in his expression changed. Not fear. Not concern. Recognition. "That's not a weapon," he said quietly. The Queen turned to him. "Then what is it?" Elias didn't answer immediately, because he already knew. And that was the problem. "It's a message," he said. A beat passed. "Then what kind of message?" she asked. Elias's gaze didn't leave the projection. "The kind you send," he said calmly, "when you want to prove nothing can stop you." The object continued its descent. Every defense the Empire had lit up in response. Weapons charged. Shields aligned. Fleets repositioned. And yet, something about it felt inevitable. Unstoppable. The room held its breath. Because, for the first time, they were no longer in control. And Elias knew it. Which meant only one thing. This was where everything changed. The alarms did not stop. They escalated. Across the capital, across the fleets in orbit, across every command channel in the Empire, the same signal repeated, impact trajectory confirmed, interception failure probability rising, energy output beyond containment thresholds. Every system responded. Every weapon fired. And none of it mattered. From the observation deck, the sky itself seemed to bend around the incoming object. Not a ship. Not a missile. Something denser. Something that did not behave like anything the Empire had ever faced. Energy beams struck it first. They should have vaporized anything known. Instead, they curved. Not deflected. Bent. As if space itself had decided the attack no longer applied. Shock rippled through the command chamber. "Redirect all batteries," a general ordered, his voice tight. "Increase output, maximum yield." They obeyed instantly. The next wave hit harder. Faster. Brighter. And again. Nothing. The object did not slow. It did not respond. It simply continued, cutting through the defensive grid like it had already accounted for every possible resistance. Queen Sereth stood at the center of the room, her posture unchanged, her voice still sharp, still controlled, but the weight behind it had shifted. "Shield the lower districts," she commanded. "Evacuate all non-essential sectors. Prepare for ground-level impact protocols." They were preparing to survive it. That alone told Elias everything. He watched the projection, silent, calculating, remembering. Because this wasn't new. Not to him. The energy signature. The behavior. The complete disregard for conventional force. He had seen it before. And last time, it had not been stopped. "You can't intercept it," he said. No one responded immediately, because they already knew. One of the commanders turned toward him anyway, frustration breaking through discipline. "Then give us something we can do." Elias didn't look at him. "There's nothing you can do," he said calmly. The words landed harder than any impact. Because they weren't defeat. They were truth. The Queen turned to him slowly. "And you?" she asked. "Is there something you can do?" For a moment, the room seemed to narrow around that question. Every voice, every system, every mind in that chamber waiting. Elias exhaled once. Quiet. Measured. Then he stepped forward. Yes. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it changed everything. The Queen's eyes locked onto him. "Then do it." No hesitation. No demand for explanation. Just trust. That was new. Elias moved toward the open balcony overlooking the city. The wind carried the distant roar of energy weapons, the vibration of failing defenses, the growing pressure of something far beyond control descending toward them. He stepped out into it. Alone. Behind him, the chamber remained frozen. No one followed. No one spoke. Because something about the moment made it clear. This wasn't their part of the fight. Above, the object broke through the final defense layer. Close now. Too close. Its surface rippled with energy that did not belong to any known system, pulsing with a frequency that felt wrong even to look at. The air itself seemed to distort around it, bending light, bending sound, bending reality in small, terrible ways. Panic spread below. Not chaos. Worse. Certainty. Because for the first time in generations, the Empire was about to lose its core. Elias raised his hand. Not quickly. Not forcefully. Just, deliberately. And the world shifted. At first, nothing visible happened. No light. No explosion. Just a subtle change in the air, like pressure adjusting before a storm, like something vast waking up beneath the surface of reality itself. Then the distortion began. It didn't come from the object. It came from him. The space around Elias rippled outward, not violently, but with a controlled intensity that felt older, deeper. Not technology. Not energy as the Empire understood it. Something else. Inside the chamber, instruments failed. Displays flickered. Sensors overloaded. Because they weren't built to measure this. The object continued its descent. Then slowed. Not abruptly. Not forced. Just resisted. As if it had entered a region where its rules no longer applied. The generals stared in disbelief. "That's impossible," one of them whispered. No one corrected him. Because it should have been. Elias's expression did not change. His arm remained steady, his focus absolute. The pressure increased. Not outward. Inward. The space between him and the object compressing, folding, resisting the intrusion of something that did not belong. The object trembled. For the first time since it had entered the system. It reacted. Energy flared across its surface, unstable now, unpredictable. It tried to correct its trajectory, to reassert its path. It couldn't. Because the closer it came, the stronger the resistance became. The Queen stepped onto the balcony behind him. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She just watched. Because she was seeing something no ruler, no warrior, no civilization in her empire's history had ever witnessed. A single human. Standing against inevitability. Elias clenched his hand slightly. Not in strain. In control. The space collapsed. Not violently. Precisely. The object halted completely. Mid-air. Mid-descent. Frozen. Silence spread across the city. Across the fleets. Across every system still functioning enough to process what was happening. Then Elias moved his hand. A small motion, barely noticeable. And the object cracked. Not physically, conceptually. Its structure destabilized, the energy holding it together unraveling as if it had been forced into a reality that no longer supported its existence. Light bled from it. Then it collapsed. Not exploded. Erased. Gone. The sky cleared. Just like that. For a moment, nothing moved. No one spoke. Because the scale of what had just happened hadn't caught up to them yet. A weapon that could not be stopped had just been undone. Effortlessly, Elias lowered his hand. The distortion faded with it, reality settling back into place as if nothing had ever been disrupted. But everyone knew. Everything had changed. Behind him, the Queen finally found her voice. "What are you?" she asked. Not as a ruler. Not as a queen. As someone who had just seen the impossible become real. Elias turned to face her. The same calm expression. The same steady presence. But now, there was no misunderstanding left. "I told you," he said quietly. "I'm human." "That is not enough," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The silence between them deepened. The city below began to react, slowly at first, then all at once. Voices rising. Signals flooding back online. Fleets recalibrating, no longer under immediate threat. But the war. The war had just changed. Because somewhere out there, the ones who sent that weapon had just received their answer. And they would respond. The Queen stepped closer. "Will they come again?" she asked. Elias looked back toward the horizon, where the sky now stood empty. "Yes." "When?" His answer was immediate. "Soon." A pause. Then we prepare," she said. Not command. Not defiance. Resolution. Elias nodded once. Not as a subordinate. As an equal. And for the first time since the Union had begun, there was no doubt left in the Empire. Not about him. Not about humanity. The question had been answered. Not with words. With proof. But far beyond their world, beyond their fleets, beyond the boundaries of everything they thought they understood. Something had taken notice. Because a single human had just done what entire civilizations could not. And that meant one thing. The next time, they wouldn't send a message. They would come themselves.